Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we are talking about today and for the next couple weeks is going to be the war in Israel. So this week we're going to talk about the current conflict that's going on between Israel and Hamas. Next week we're going to talk about the historical conflict between Israel and Palestine. And then the third week we're going to talk about the question, is current day Israel God's people, and do they have a divine right to the land according to the Bible?
Right. Yeah, this will be interesting, and I know I've had multiple people reach out to me to ask us to talk about this topic, and what I would say is wait until all 3 episodes before making your final conclusion.
Sure.
There's just so much to this, and just understand that. There's so much to this, and even in 3 weeks of podcast, there's no way we can get through all the information there is. But we just want to help you have a paradigm to think through these things. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this will be helpful. And so once again, thank you to all our listeners. And and a special shout out to Olivia Davis, who's now...
Olivia, you're crushing it.
You're crushing it. She's now running our social media. And once again, we always say this, we want this podcast to be a podcast to help people learn to walk with God better and to view things through a gospel-centered lens. And if this has been helpful to you, share it with a friend. I know a lot of people were wondering about Andy Stanley for the past couple of weeks and Israel-Palestine. This is a great time to help your friends learn how to view these things through a gospel lens.
And if you want to, give us a like on social media, or give us a review wherever you get podcasts, because right now I think if you search culture and theology, we're number 10. We'd love to be number 9 and beat out Duke Divinity School.
Yeah, or number 1.
Number 1 would be preferable, but how do you get from 10 to 1? 9, 8, 7, or you just jump them all? I guess.
Yeah. Depending on how many likes you give us.
But before we get into the main topic today, we want to talk about our resource of the month. So Daniel, what do you have for us?
So my resource of the month is a book I heard about at a retreat I recently was at, and this person said that this book was super helpful for them, a fellow pastor. It's called Is It Abuse? A Biblical Guide to Identifying Domestic Abuse and Helping Victims by Darby Strickland. And if you're someone who, here's the thing, that word abuse is being thrown around everywhere now.
Sure.
This book has really, I haven't finished it yet, but given some good definitions, some things out to look for, some questions to ask. And if you're a pastor, or maybe you're a friend of someone who you're just wondering, is this abuse? Mm-hmm. And this abuse could kind of cover a wide range of different things. It could be a friend, a child that you know, whatever it is. It just gives good, I feel like a lot of people enjoy our podcast, and this is feedback we've gotten, because we give words to things that people are thinking but don't have words for.
Sure. This
is a great book to give you words to the abuse word that's been thrown out there, and gives you like some metrics and stuff that you can look at. And it's been a really helpful book.
That's good. That's it's sad that needs to be a resource of the month, but
it is.
It does.
Yeah.
My resource of the month is a little more lighthearted than that. So we bought our kids a swing set, outdoor playground or whatever, and
from Costco.
We actually went straight from KidCraft.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I guess I've now endorsed them. KidCraft, if you want to sponsor this podcast, we'll talk. But let's just say my backyard's not quite as level as I thought it was, and that became very evident with the Leaning Tower of Pisa playground that we started to put together.
You put it up yourself.
So first life hack is marry a person who likes to build things. Thank you, Hillary. You're my life hack. I was like, let's just pay somebody to do this. And she's like, no, this would be fun. And I was like, we have a different definition of fun. But we're working through it together. It's actually been enjoyable. But the ground's not nearly as level as we thought it was.
Leveling is tough.
So there are two life hack potentials here. If you're going to do an outdoor play set, number one, you can buy some like playground levelers on Amazon, and you just put them in the corners. They're these big rubber kind of things that you can stack 2 or 3 at a time and get a few inches to level it out. That's one option. Option 2 is you cut out a giant square, around the whole area, and you just level that.
Yeah.
But we were like, man, that would require like a bobcat and doing some significant stuff. Option 3, what we took, we just basically, I took my edger and I edged around the just base of the playground. It's rectangle.
Yeah.
And then we moved it, and we just leveled that portion of it. So it was pretty hard, but
you did it.
We kept as much grass as we could in the background. So be your own leveler, I guess is my life. So we leveled it, and then we bought rubber tiles and we put them on the ground.
Okay. So this playground, you didn't have to like dig post holes and put cement in and stuff. Like how does it stay stable?
We haven't gotten to that step 153 so far. We were on 112. So I might be back next week saying I made a giant mistake. This will not work. But it actually is like, it's not concrete related. You kind of chisel some stuff into the ground. So I think we'll still be able to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or it will be wildly unsafe for our children. One of those two. Yeah.
We'll see.
What else is insurance for? Am I right? So that's
yeah. Why pay for the insurance if you don't use it?
If you're not going to use it,
that's a great
you know what I'm
point.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Resources of the month. So into our topic, war in Israel. We want to talk about this week, kind of what's going on right now, the current conflict. So what's going on?
Yeah, if you guys haven't heard yet, I mean, how many days ago was it now? 10 days or so?
Was it?
It must have been around 10 days ago.
Yeah.
10 to 12 days ago. Hamas, which is a terrorist...
October 7th, actually. So it's been...
Wow, 16.
Two weeks.
Wow.
Over 2 weeks.
Man.
Yeah.
I've been in like a time warp or something.
Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th.
Yeah, Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. If you haven't seen, it was a planned attack. They took hang gliders and all this stuff, and I mean, it's crazy. They like motorized these hang gliders and like flew in and then like dropped into places, and they dropped into a concert and killed a bunch of people, kidnapped a bunch of people. There was a lot of... I guess we should play a disclaimer. If you're listening with kids, this is not a kid-friendly podcast, and so go ahead and turn that off right now. But I mean, you have stories of women being raped and their throats being slit. You have stories of babies' heads being cut off.
Yeah. Just barbarism at its worst.
Yeah, and it wasn't a military attack.
It was a terrorist attack.
It was a terrorist attack, and they targeted civilians.
Yeah.
Right? And so, yes, sure, they killed some police, and I'm sure they killed some people in the military. But this was a terrorist attack aimed at civilians.
Yeah.
And so it was all over the news. I mean, if you watch some of these videos, not only was some of the violence horrifying, but some of it was just... I couldn't believe. I mean, the hang glider thing. I just couldn't believe those videos. I mean, it looked like there were. The videos looked like there was like from far away bugs in the air coming, and then it was people on hang gliders, like sitting in these chairs on these hang gliders. Essentially, like I don't know if parachuting in is the right word, like dropping down, and they had their weapons and they were just killing people, massacring people,
just
and
crazy.
I saw this was like maybe the most Jews that were killed in one day since the Holocaust.
Yes.
I saw. And maybe you want to tell that story. I think you told it in the sermon recently, but about the father who heard about his daughter.
This father had his 8-year-old daughter went missing, and he thought that she was kidnapped by Hamas. And he found out, I don't exactly know how, and I don't know how much time it was that had passed since he was wondering the status of his daughter. He found out she was dead. And his reply was, yes, yes. And through tears, he said, I was so relieved to find out my daughter was dead because I knew what Hamas would do to her if she was alive is worse than death.
That's a crazy
statement. I just can't even imagine that being a father of 2 daughters. It just ripped my heart out to hear that. So yeah, this is just like terroristic barbarity, we're going back to the Stone Ages and worse for the kind of things that have been perpetrated against Israel. And so Israel has responded very strongly. They've declared war. They're not just calling this a conflict. They've declared war.
Yes.
They have been doing air raids and bombings on the Gaza Strip.
Yep.
They've told everyone who lives in Gaza, you need to get out because we're coming in.
Yep.
And at the time of this recording, we're recording this on October 23rd. They are preparing for a ground invasion of Gaza. And
once again, we have to understand there's a difference between a terrorist attack and declaring formal war.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's was Israel's response.
Yeah.
And if you're like, what's Gaza? It's really, honestly, a lot of this geography is really important to look up.
And we're going to get to a lot of this next week as we
Yes.
talk through this kind of the historical nature of this.
Yeah. But so it's, I'm laughing because there's, I mean, if you're like, explain all this to me, I'm like, how much time you got?
Right.
Like, it's just crazy how much there is to
Yeah.
be behind all of this. But yeah, I mean, to tell me a little bit more about Israel's response and why they have responded in the way that they have. And then I think there's this ongoing narrative too about the civilians in Gaza. So what are your thoughts about some of that? What's happening there?
Well, Israel has responded swiftly and decisively. And I mean, one thing that's important to note is this was a huge intelligence failure for Israel. They had the Iron Dome defense shield, and they're usually very good at spotting out these things. So there's probably going to be in future months some heavy accountability that comes back to how did you miss this?
Right.
I heard one person say a lot of people have compared this to Israel's. This is Israel's 9/11. But that's not exactly fair because we could have never pictured 9/11. Like
Right.
using a plane as a weapon was just out there.
Yeah.
What happened here is exactly what the leaders of Israel are supposed to picture happening.
Yeah, this conflict is happening all the time.
Yes. And so normally they would catch something like this. So there's that piece of it. But I think what you're seeing in the nation of Israel is both a call for accountability on that end and a rallying together to defeat Hamas.
Right.
So Israel's made it clear we're going to entirely dismantle Hamas. And I do think, and this is bleeding a little bit into our next segment here, but kind of putting my cards on the table here, there are a lot of people calling for a ceasefire,
Right.
you know, and I think that's inappropriate at this stage in the game. I think Biden's done a good job about saying, you know, we have encouraged and reminded Israel to obey the international laws of war.
Right.
You know, you don't target civilians. You do your best to minimize civilian casualties. But it's like America after 9/11 calls for ceasefire with Al Qaeda is just inappropriate.
Right.
You know, so this is again kind of bleeding into my perspective here, but yeah, Israel is responding forcefully and decisively,
Right.
And they are saying we are taking out Hamas, we are dismantling this terrorist organization.
Yeah, I feel like Westerners, it's easy for us to think, okay, like they attacked once. If you don't attack, they're not going to attack again.
Right.
And that's just not the
how
case.
terrorists
If
work.
Israel does not respond,
Yep.
they will continue to do stuff over and over and over again to try to annihilate
Yep.
Israel. Yeah.
And so even thinking through how they respond, how we should think about how they respond, all that stuff, has led us to, we want to kind of analyze the responses to this tragedy,
Yeah.
to this horror that we've seen within the West. And I think you can particularly see these, we kind of have it in 4 different categories, showing up in the hospital bombing from last week.
Yes. Yeah, this is so hard to explain. So, but yeah, I feel like the question a lot of times is, how do I respond?
Yeah,
And
how should I think about this?
And we want to give you kind of 4 different ways that we have seen responses come out, and it's like, here are the 4 ways you can respond.
Right.
And we're going to tell you these
Which
ways.
way you should respond.
And then we're going to I think there are some ways that are appropriate to respond and some that are just like so
Off
out
the table.
Off
Yeah.
the table that's like, as a Christian, I don't think you should respond this way.
Yeah.
And so we'll let you know which one. So, for example, if you guys have been following the news, there was this in the news We heard about a hospital bombed that was a Baptist Christian hospital that was in Gaza that was bombed. And there was
Right.
all sorts of news that came out about it. Some of it was true. A lot of it was untrue. It first came out that maybe Israel bombed the hospital, right? That's what was being reported. Then it was reported that Hamas misfired a missile and actually destroyed the hospital. Then it was reported that Israel or that hospital wasn't actually destroyed even at all, and that most of it was intact. Some of the glass had shattered and all the stuff, but most of it was attacked or intact. Then you have different people responding. Some people were saying that Israel's lying. Some people are saying Hamas is lying. People are just pointing fingers. See, this is what they do. You know, this is what the enemy does. And I feel like you see a lot of what we're about to go over from this hospital bombing, how you can kind of get entrenched in your own view and view the same event in
Totally different
ways.
Yep. And we've definitely seen that. And so in our estimation, there are kind of 4 ways to view this current conflict.
I guess this is important. Yeah, we're not taking this from like an article or paper. We have come up
We
with.
just made this up.
We're summarizing 4 ways that we have seen people respond to this.
And we're calling it blindly loyal to Israel, blindly loyal to Palestine, lean Israel, and lean Palestine.
Yeah, and when we mean blindly loyal, we mean your worldview is that Israel is always correct, no matter what they do and no matter what Hamas does or no matter what Palestine does.
Yep.
Or blindly loyal to Palestine. Like no matter what happens, no matter what news comes out, no matter what facts come out,
You're on their side.
Palestine is right, Israel's wrong.
Yep.
End of story.
Yep.
Right? And then the lean Israel and lean Palestine are you're trying your best to think through this logically, looking at the facts, looking at for things to come out. But let's just be honest. No one is unbiased. No one is really truly neutral here. You're gonna lean one way or the other for differing reasons. We're gonna go through those reasons.
Yep. So the first is you're blindly loyal to Israel, and there's kind of 2 options here. One is a theological reason, and one is like an ethnic, cultural reason.
Yes.
So the first reason some people are blindly loyal to Israel is kind of this, maybe you could call it extreme dispensationalism or strong dispensationalism, which views, look, ethnic Israel is God's people.
Yep.
God made promises to ethnic Israel for the land. They are his people. Genesis 12 says those who bless you, Abraham, will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed.
Right.
And Israel, ethnic Israel, the current nation state, is the inheritor of that. And so I want the blessing of Genesis 12. And so if America sticks with Israel, God's going to bless America. And that's the biblical way that it is.
Yep.
And so it doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter if they, if they respond in a really bad way to this. We're for Israel because God is for Israel. Period. End of story.
Yep.
The Bible says it. That settles it.
Yep, for sure. It's funny, like, if you wonder why U.S. is so pro-Israel, I think there's a lot of differing reasons. But one of the reasons is because dispensational Christianity was very popular in the 1900s when a lot of these policies were coming into effect. And you got to think that had a tremendous effect on the American populace in politics to say, Israel is God's people, America is God's people.
Right.
So we're God's people together.
Yes.
There's a lot of that going on. And for this whole blindly loyal to Israel, you take anything that happens, you either say, Hamas is lying, right? This is fake news. This is propaganda against Israel. Or you're going to say, here are the reasons why Israel was justified, right?
Yep.
So, like, for anything that happens, you're going to take that view.
Sure.
And for American Christians, a lot of people are taking this view.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. The second option outside of kind of this dispensationalism is a cultural thing, and that is you are Israeli, and you're maybe an Israeli American, and so those are your people. I mean, you are you're an Israeli, and so there is a cultural element to this as well that I think you can have some blindly loyal people on a cultural side.
Yes. You take, man, I'm blanking, the Daily Wire guy, Ben Shapiro. He would fall into this category,
Sure.
right? I think he would probably disagree that we're calling him blindly loyal to Israel, but
Sure.
he is a Jewish American.
How do you separate that?
Yeah, who's going to see it from the lens that he grew up in, and that, it's interesting. I had a lot of Jewish friends in high school growing up. And it's funny, I'm remembering things they told me in high school that are now making more sense now.
Sure.
Because they were constantly telling me, Palestine wants to annihilate us.
Right.
And I'm like, what, as a Westerner, it's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's true. And we're going to go into the history of the conflict next week. But whether that's, I guess, objectively true or not, that is how people from Israel feel.
Sure.
Right? And I'd say that they have a lot of evidence to support that.
I would say, put my cards on the table. I agree with it.
Yes.
I think that is true.
Yeah. But that is the perspective that they are coming from. And I feel like it's really interesting to see my Israeli friends. I had a couple friends that in high school graduated and served in the Israeli army for a couple of years because they went back to protect Israel.
Yeah.
And I can tell they're trying to straddle the line as best they can, but man, they have this worldview that is just so different than any Westerner that does.
Yeah.
From a perspective of we have to protect our people.
We're going to get wiped out.
Yeah. And something that's interesting to note about this view for both both from Israelis and if you're a Palestinian is in America we live in a guilt innocence culture. We can only imagine that someone would do acts of violence if you have done acts of violence towards them first.
Sure.
Right? That it's only fair, right?
Yep.
That the retaliation. But something you don't understand about, a lot of Westerners don't understand, is in honor-shame culture, it's not necessarily about right and wrong. What is right is bringing honor to you and your family and your nation. And so it's not about objectively right and wrong. It's about honor.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is honor to Israel or honor to Palestine or Hamas, And it's like, if as long as what you do you feel like brings honor to Allah or honor to whatever,
Sure.
To your family, then you can kind of do whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so even these acts of violence, which we as Westerners would immediately say, this is wrong, not the same going on in their mind as well. And this is how Israel is viewing what Hamas is doing.
Sure.
Is out of an honor-shame culture, and that's really important as well.
Yeah.
And I'll get into this too a little bit when we talk about the Muslim Americans who are here. It has been crazy to me to see my Israeli friends post. Only in the West can the news side with, like the general culture side with Hamas/Palestine when they have committed acts of like genocide against Israel. Then literally the next post I see is a Muslim friend say, only in the West can the general populace and the media side with Israel, who is committing genocide against Palestine.
Wow.
Literally,
Yeah,
on my
side by
Facebook, side by side. And
Yeah.
it was the same talking point, but from way different views. And that's why we're talking about
Sure.
this. And it's part of it's an honor-shame thing. Part of it is you grew up that way. That's what your parents taught you.
Yeah.
That's just what is ingrained in you. And this is the way you view the world is through this lens. And it's very, very different than if you grew up purely in the States and you're like a American who grew up in the States.
Yeah, well said. So that's blindly loyal to Israel. The second category is blindly loyal to Palestine. And similar to the first category, there's kind of a theological option and a cultural option. You'd be surprised to hear this maybe called theological, but the first really is almost an adherence to critical theory. So we've talked about critical race theory, but critical theory is the broader umbrella under which like critical race theory derives. Critical theory, this is overly simplistic of what it is, but it's a worldview, it's an analytical tool that kind of divides the world into the oppressed and the oppressors.
Yeah.
And there's a section of critical theory called post-colonialism, which is kind of the study of the effects of colonialism.
Yes.
And people who adopt a critical theory worldview would say this thing called Zionism, which was the Jews returning to the land of Israel
Right.
in the 1900s, this was colonialism. And these Jews colonized the land of Palestine. They essentially kicked the natives out. And so they are the oppressors.
Right.
Even though 6 million of them were massacred in the Holocaust.
And
somehow,
throughout history, basically every nation has oppressed Israelis.
But somehow, according to this critical theory, post-colonialism, intellectual worldview framework, they're the oppressors.
Right.
And so therefore, because you've bought into critical theory, you have to side with Palestine. This is the blindly loyal to Palestine. You must, because your worldview declares Israel to be a colonist,
yes,
an oppressor. And the whole thing about critical theory is you got to overthrow the oppressor.
This is the same with Marxism and
right.
where you get proletariat and bourgeois, right? If you know that history, you would say the Palestinians are the proletariat and the Israelites are, or the Israelis are the bourgeois, and so you need to rise up against. And I've even seen this. There's colonialism, there's post-colonialism, there's decolonialism, and what these people are saying about decolonialism is you can only decolonize with violence, and
right.
so they're actually calling for violence.
Right.
And if you've seen,
and they justified it in their mind by saying this is what you have to do.
Yeah. And where do you see this? You see this on student groups at Harvard and Columbia and these. Man, I'm blanking. What do you call those group of schools?
Ivy League.
Ivy Leagues.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't get in.
The Ivies have very much bought into this.
Yeah, and a lot of the presidents haven't spoken for or against any of this. They've just been silent. A lot of the professors have come out. And, I mean, I've seen all these videos of these professors cheering on the decolonization of...
Yeah, this is why. The reaction that we've seen in the kind of American intellectual academic West, this is it. It's a critical theory, post-colonialism, decolonialism
and honestly,
framework.
To me, it's just kind of like they're just using this Israel-Palestine conflict to push their own critical theory onto the West.
Sure.
And so we would say, which one should you not be? This is clearly one that
definitely not this.
Yeah. As a Christian, you are against this.
Yeah.
So you should be against this.
Yeah.
We don't view the world through this lens.
This is
a false worldview, and it's a very dangerous one.
Not compatible with the biblical worldview.
Yeah. And then the oppressor dynamic is so interesting to me. I mean, you look at Jewish people for the past... since the Old Testament, all the way to what I call recent history, the past 2,000 years, it's a miracle that
they still exist.
There's even Jews.
Yes.
Like people have scapegoated Jews for all of history and have oppressed Jews. Like if you really want to go the critical theory route, there's like one group of people that you can confidently say have been oppressed.
It's
and those
the
are
Jews.
The Jewish people.
Yeah.
But somehow in this upside down way of looking at the world, they are now the oppressor, so it's okay for Hamas as the oppressed to come and do these kind of things.
Right.
And so you're just going to view everything that Palestinians do or Hamas, I guess Hamas in this case.
Yeah. And we should distinguish between Hamas and the Palestinian people.
Yes, because there are peaceful Palestinians. Yeah. I guess we should go out and
then we'll cover that next week. Yeah.
Yeah. But here in Hamas, like
Palestine doesn't equal Hamas. Hamas doesn't equal Palestine.
Yeah. I saw this video of this professor saying it was beautiful to see what Hamas was doing because they were like unoppressing themselves.
And it was disgusting.
It's disgusting. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And to be fair, there are people in this next category that would also reject this as well.
And so the other way you can be blindly loyal to Palestine, similar to being blindly loyal to Israel, is culture. You have grown up as a Muslim.
Yeah.
You are Palestinian. You have Palestinian friends or relatives.
Yeah.
You carry a certain cultural...
Your parents are immigrants.
Yeah.
You're an immigrant or your parents are immigrants.
You've heard the stories of, Israel, in your view, oppressing your people, Israel pushing your people out of the land. You've grown up with these stories. And so for you, the framework that you come to this, it's not critical theory. It's just this cultural embracing of Palestine and the Muslim people that you are unable to view it any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. My Jewish friends in high school were just very anti-Palestine, pro-Israel. And I had Palestinian friends and Muslim friends that were very pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. And some of them were friends with each other. And I don't know. It was just like, I don't looking
Right.
back, I was like, how did this all work?
Yeah.
You know, it's been so interesting to me to see how this all works. And once again, it's very the same. You take the same event. I have my pro-Palestine friends who either ethnically are from that region and their parents immigrated here or are Muslim themselves.
Yeah.
And who are just viewing it as the West is out to get us.
Yeah.
They're siding with Israel.
Yeah.
Even though, and Israel's like the West is out to get, you know, or some people in the West are out to get us. They're
Right.
siding with Palestine.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
How this is all played out.
Yeah.
But here's what gets muddy too, and we'll talk about some of this next week as well, is like Hamas is this terrorist organization who committed these acts. But Hamas was also supported by a number of different countries,
Yep.
Muslim countries, and it's like it's hard. You can't say all of them. All people in the Middle East support Hamas.
Sure.
That's unfair. You can't
Yep.
say that, especially as individuals. But they got backing from somewhere,
Yep. Yep.
right?
Yep.
Other terrorist organizations in other countries. People
Yep.
have thrown out like Iran as one of these countries, right?
Yep.
And then the countries surrounding it. It's been really interesting. It's really hard to separate, and especially if you take it like a bird's eye view, it's
Yeah.
really hard to separate.
For sure.
Obviously, there are individuals who are in that region who very much oppose what Hamas did, but
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard
Yeah.
to separate it out. But then you just look at it. You know, I've had my pro-Palestine friends who say, yes, terrorism is definitely wrong, but we're still pro-Palestine, and what Israel now is doing is also wrong,
Sure.
and almost equating the two in some
Yep.
ways, and it's very convoluted, complicated.
Yeah. So option one is blindly loyal to Israel. Option two, or reaction two, blindly loyal to Palestine. Reaction three, we're calling lean Israel, and this would be people that would be like, you know, my kind of disposition. I'm not blindly loyal to Israel, but I'm kind of on their side, and there's a few different reasons you might give. One, people might say, well, it's in the United States' national interest. Israel is our ally. We should side with our allies. They're our friend. You got your friends back when they
Right.
get into a fight. That's something we hear.
And like, let's be honest, most of those countries in the Middle East do not like the West.
And Israel does. So
And so you're like, okay,
there's
well,
pure national interest here.
it's like, yeah, if you're
These people like us. We like them. We're on their side.
yeah,
Another thing is like they were attacked by terrorists. What do you expect them to do? You know, you had people invading their space, chopping off the heads of babies, kidnapping grandmothers, killing the grandmother, taking a video of it, posting it on Facebook. That's how this granddaughter figured out her grandma died. What do you expect any kind of civilized government to do
Right.
when that kind of barbarity invades them? So this would be people saying, look, I'm not blindly loyal to Israel. If Israel starts doing the same thing on the other side, I'm going to condemn them.
Right.
But look what's been done to them. What do you expect them to do?
Right.
That'd be kind of a lean Israel thing.
yeah. And you would say, a lean Israel, you say, oh, these terrorists attack Israel. What is Israel supposed to do?
Right.
You have to counterattack. You even have these stories about. I've seen like some pro-Palestinian posts that are like, "See, Israel is just as bad because they're bombing civilians in Gaza." But you know, someone who leans Israel, like what I've read, for example, is Israel had told people, civilians in Gaza, to get out.
Yeah.
And I've read that Hamas is not letting those civilians leave.
Right.
So they're using them as human shields. What's Israel supposed to do?
Right.
They're trying to follow the rules of war.
Right.
You even hear about, for example, you hear stories about like they're bombing these roads, they can't leave. But I think
I mentioned under one of the roads. What I have heard, one of the roads that evacuates Gaza to Egypt. It's like there's like one road.
Yep.
Hamas built a tunnel underneath the road to smuggle all this stuff in from Egypt. So Israel has bombed the road, and they're like, "Well, you're not letting us go. Look what you've done to these civilians. You bombed this road." And it's like, "Well, you chose to build the tunnel underneath."
Yeah. What are we
supposed to do?
How do you?
That's how the arms. This is how all these stuff got in the first place.
Right.
So yeah,
and Hamas is setting up their base of operations in hospitals and universities and stuff.
What are you
like,
supposed to do?
And it's like, oh yeah, Israel's bombing this university. Like, look how evil they are. But it's like, well,
where you put your war headquarters. Yeah.
Yes. What are you supposed to do?
And you have a great quote that you heard, I guess, from a friend maybe, or
I saw it on a Israeli friend's post. He said, if Palestine lays down their guns, there will be peace. Because Israel, they say, are not trying to take more land. They're not trying to. Israel does not want to be at war with Palestine. Mm-hmm. But if Israel lays down their guns, there will be no more Israel, because ever since 1947, I mean, once again, we'll get into the history next week, but with the 6 Days War and all this stuff, all those countries around there have tried to annihilate Israel, right? And so from that perspective, they would say Israel can't lay down their guns because we have to defend ourselves.
Right.
And I would say, from what I've read, I would agree that most of what it seems like Israel has been doing has been defensive. Mm-hmm. And the ones who have been offensive have been Palestinian groups.
Did it say Palestine or Hamas? Your post.
They said Palestine.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Just that whole region.
Yeah.
Yeah. And probably even like broader than that into more of the Middle East than even just that region. But they it didn't say Hamas, it said Palestine.
President Biden, I think he's been pretty strong on this, and he's told an interesting story a couple times in speeches that he's given, which I found interesting. He talked about the first time he visited Israel as a United States senator, and they were looking at all the defensive measures, and he said that I think it was their prime minister or a significant national leader that told him, they were like, I can tell, Senator Biden, you look kind of concerned, but we have this secret hope. We have nowhere else to go. And where else is there a Jewish state? Nowhere.
Yeah.
This Jewish state is surrounded by Muslim states that want to annihilate them, that do not believe they have a right to exist. And so if you're in the Lean Israel camp, you're practically looking at the situation and going, what else are they supposed to do?
Right. And if we're laying our cards on the table, this is where I land.
This is where I'm at.
Is Lean Israel. Not because I think that, but because of a dispensational theological view.
Yep.
Just looking at from U.S. national interests and just for what's happening and how they have defended themselves. That's where I land. We talked earlier today with the Lean Israel view. Well, if they start launching terrorist attacks against innocent Palestinian civilians,
right,
I would just be against both.
Yes. I guess that could be the fifth category.
Yeah.
Right. So,
we don't support terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
Chopping babies' heads off. We don't raping people.
Yeah, I'm just
slitting people's throats
the
for no
opposite
reasons,
of that. Whatever
attacking
that is, opposite
civilians.
of that.
Yeah, we're against that.
Yeah. So this would be the camp that I'm in, and then the final, I guess, way you could view this current conflict, we could say lean Palestinian or lean toward Palestine, and we had a Jewish friend who said his dad made the comment, and this is kind of surprising because he's ethnically Jewish.
Yeah.
He said, what else do you think's going to happen when you occupy people for this long?
Yeah.
And I think if you're like lean Palestine or you're like Palestinian sympathetic, you're like, look, of course terrorism is bad. Of course what Hamas did was wrong. There's no excuse for that. But you tend to look at it mainly from the lens of kind of the humanitarian reality of what is it like to be Palestinian, to kind of have had your land taken from you in the 40s, and now you're kind of under this Israeli blockade.
Yeah.
And you kind of, you're not okay with the terrorism, but you kind of look at this and you go, gosh, I mean, that's really messy.
So factually, there were people who are Palestinian people who were living in that land that in the 40s lost their homes.
Right.
When Israel, Jewish people came back.
Yep.
Factually, that is
it
true.
is what it is. Yep.
Yep.
And so you kind of look at it mainly from that lens.
You know what's funny? This is probably the one I've seen the least.
It
I don't
is
know if it's
interesting,
funny,
right?
But it's just interesting.
Yeah.
It's the one I've seen the least. I've seen some Jewish people take this view.
Yeah.
That I don't know if they're necessarily like pro-Palestine, but it's just what do you expect?
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know if I've seen any like white Americans take this view.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
Yep. So we've kind of laid our cards on the table where we are. I'd say like the blindly loyal to either side is dangerous.
It is.
Because it's just like politics in a way. Like blind loyalty prevents you from calling evil
Yes.
when your side commits it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we want to say is like, I think that there is I'm pretty passionate about this, and I'm pretty ticked off about it, mainly because of the like critical theory response in the United States just
Right.
drives me crazy.
Let me say this. This is where the critical theory starts to fold in on itself. There was some kind of protest, and there were like the LGBTQ for Palestine with the Muslims for Palestine people. The Muslims look over and go and attack them, the LGBT people, and take down their flag and destroy their signs.
Really?
Well, because
Where did that happen?
maybe London.
Gosh.
But
Yeah, you're like the LGBTQ community. Do you know what Muslims want to do
Believe?
to you?
Yeah.
yeah.
This is where.
But that's the
critical
irony of it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like, but critical theory has lumped you into the same group.
Yes, and
Yeah.
why do the LGBTQ people side with Palestine? Because they view themselves through this lens of
Right.
oppressor,
Right.
oppressee, and they'll say we're both oppressed.
Yeah.
and they not understanding that the Muslim culture is very different than what you see with the
Yep.
LGBTQ culture,
Yep.
and what the Muslims how they view that whole culture.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of driven me crazy. I haven't seen so much. There's some in Christian community that the blindly loyal to Israel. And we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. So sorry for the cliffhanger, but like, is that a legitimate theological position? We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. But there's been some of that that I've certainly seen. But I'm just like, what we want to say is, however you land, we need to be able to speak with clarity and conviction against evil.
Yeah.
So anytime you're chopping babies' heads off, I'm not going to be on your team, period.
Right.
Terrorism, not going to be on your team. And the fact that we seem unable to just speak that clearly drives me crazy. Like, two things can be true at the same time. Thing number one, the history of Israel and Palestine is complex.
Yes.
And doing the right thing, what is doing the right thing over the long term? That is a very complex answer. And terrorism is evil, and what Hamas did to Israel is evil. Full stop. We don't have to give people the full history of this conflict to be able to say that. And I think Christians, we need to stand for truth, and we need to stand for righteousness. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and when coming up with your own worldview, I'm thinking there's kind of two levels you can view this. As a Christian, we all have to agree as Christians what you just said. Love what is right and good, uphold the standard of goodness and holiness that God has given us and hate what is evil. And understand that as Christians, we aren't citizen. Our main citizenship is in heaven with God, not even the nation we're part of, right? So no matter who's listening, what country you're part of, that's what all we can agree. We all have to, as Christians, agree with that.
Yeah.
Hate what is evil, be on the side of good.
Yeah.
And how God defines it.
Yep.
We can disagree, for example, as you're coming up with your own view of like politically, who should you side with in terms of Israel or not, right? You can have some disagreement there.
Sure.
And disagreement about like, for example, if you're like a Christian who your parents immigrated from Palestine and you know family members there and you want to see them protected and not, whatever. We can disagree on that level, and we can both hate evil and hate evil acts, but also kind of disagree where we land on a secondary level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a long-term solution.
Yeah, how to bring about long-term solution, long-term peace. You can disagree how that comes about.
Yeah.
The ways that becomes about, what policies need to be enacted, all that stuff. You can disagree on how that happens, but we can't disagree on what is evil and what is good defined by God in the scriptures.
Yep. And you can go back and we had a podcast on just war theory. I think the title is "Should I Kill You?"
Yes.
Maybe we should have been a little more mature in our.
That was
title.
back in the day when I was still coming up with titles.
Maybe more sensitive titles are needed, but I do want to point out just quickly as we close Romans 13, because I do think it's important to understand. Sometimes I think the immediate Christian response, which I'm grateful for, is, well, Jesus said, love your enemies and turn the other cheek. So why are we talking about war? That's a legitimate question. Romans 13, I think, is part of the answer. Romans 13, Paul says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. That's Romans 13, 1-7. So in other words, the government is an institution given by God, in part for the restraining of evil, and the government is given the sword. So when someone wrongs you, you do not have the right to just go kill them.
Right.
You say, I'm going to avenge the wrongdoing. But when someone comes against the ordering of society, the right ordering of society with violence and terrorism, the government as an institution given by God does have the right to use the sword that was given to them by God for the right ordering of society and the restraining of evil.
Yeah.
And so I would say, just from a Christian worldview, Israel does have a biblical right, Romans 13 right, to use the sword given to them by God to put down evil and to order a peaceful society. And so I think that's important. And then again, we've talked about in the past Christian just war theory, the targeting of civilians, minimizing damage done to civilians. But here's just the reality of things. Sin has awful consequences. We've talked about how we often experience suffering because of our sin, other people's sins, and the brokenness of the world. You play that out in war, right? There's nothing about this that's good. There's nothing about this that's desirable. But there's a lot about this that can be right in Israel's response.
Right.
Civilians are going to die as a result of Israel's strikes. And that's tragic. That tragedy came about because a group of terrorists made a decision to attack Israel. Israel has a right to use the sword given to them by God to strike down evil. The sad consequence of that are some civilians who had no share in planning that are going to die. That's a tragedy. And we can say that.
Yeah.
But in this sinful, broken world, that happens sometimes. And that's just where we live. This is so broken.
Yeah.
This is so awful. And yet, a government like that must use the sword in times like this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, terrorists will run over our entire civilization. You can't let terrorists have their way. You got to use the sword, and that's my opinion in this scenario. And I think Israel has a biblical right to. And we should be realistic about the tragedy that represents, that there are innocent civilians who will die.
Yeah.
And if Israel starts targeting innocent civilians,
it changes.
They do not have a mandate for that.
Yeah.
But the reality is there will be casualties. That's a tragedy. It reminds us of the brokenness of this world.
Yeah.
And how this world is groaning to be redeemed. And we long for King Jesus to come back, the true King, and set all things right.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's sad. Peace is not found on this side of eternity by evil deciding not to be evil anymore.
Yeah.
The reason there's wars is because evil people decide to be evil, and then people need to put down evil.
Yeah. And that's what Israel is doing right now.
Yeah.
And Paul calls the state the minister of God in this instance. And you don't have to embrace 100% Israel's right all the time, because they're God's chosen people, to embrace the reality that God gave us government to restrain evil.
Yeah.
And when government does that, and think about this, Paul's writing Romans during the Roman Empire.
Right.
Shortly before, some persecution had broken out. It was going to get a lot worse. But Paul was still saying, even this evil Roman Empire, it's the government. It is a minister of God for the restraining of evil.
Right.
So when you let evil just fully unleashed, which is terrorism, you can't. No.
And I love what you said about why you shouldn't blindly follow one side or not.
Yeah.
Because what happens when you blindly follow Israel or Palestine, the enemy only commits evil, and you can't commit evil.
Correct.
And it's like your view of what is good or evil has just been completely sideways. It's not right. You don't have a clear view of what is actually good and evil, because everything they do is evil and everything we do is good. And that's how you view it. But instead, we got to take a step back as Christians. I understand if you're like a Jewish or Muslim person listening to this, you got a different worldview than us, but we're talking to Christians. If you're a Christian, you got to take the Christian, biblical, Christ-centered worldview on this.
Which means individually, you love your enemies, you pray for those who persecute you, and you turn the other cheek.
Yes.
So that means, Christian, as you see people responding to this, and this is me preaching myself here, people responding to this situation in the totally opposite way that you are, you got to love them, you got to pray for them, you got to turn the other cheek if they personally insult you.
Right.
But the nation of Israel, as a nation state, they have to bear the sword. And so we have to pray for their leaders to bear that sword righteously and correctly in the midst of this conflict. So that's where we're at now. That's the current conflict. Next week, we'll be back talking about the historical underpinnings of this. So we're going to go back in time thousands of years and give an overview on how people view this so differently. So thanks for joining us for this week, and we'll talk to you next week.